Alright guys, so Ash's Ultimate Team has been a long-running side topic within the Pokemon anime, and for good reason. I mean, who wouldn't want to find and see the most elite possible combination of Ash's roster? With every new series comes new Pokemon, which evolves the discussion further, but after a while the usual procedure just gets stale. It's always the quote-unquote strongest, which is always just the ace Pokemon, maybe an outlier if you want the extra mile to be unique. But to be honest, for every video, every post, every whatever, it really makes you think, would this team actually happen in the show? No, seriously, when it came to Ash using his old Pokemon, can you see Charizard making a fitting return in Diamond and Pearl, Sceptile in Black and White, and Fernape in XYZ? Don't get me started on journeys, but the point I'm trying to get at is that these teams never feel like something Ash would realistically whip out at whatever current series he's in. That may sound crazy, but every Pokemon anime series is different. The regions, how Ash reacts to them, the type of Pokemon he befriends, the way his character grows, it's all unique in its own way. Sure, maybe you make them knowing it'll never happen, but I wanted to take a different spin at things. That's why I decided to find and create Ash's Ultimate Team for every series. We're still going to eye for the strongest, but unlike how most people make them, I'm going to attempt for these to be the closest thing to be narratively accurate. And before we dive in, let's explore some ground rules. Rule number 1, Pikachu must take up one slot. He's the main partner and there's just no replacing him. But for the sake of convenience, I will omit from elaborating on his highlights for each series. He has good days, bad days, maybe even just okay ones. No need to beat around the bush for very similar track records. Number 2, only 2 Pokemon originating from the series of the Ultimate Team in question must be added. This is to prevent an overload of a series-specific team and welcome more guest appearances. The last thing we'd want is something similar to the Hoenn team featuring Heracross and Gible. This restriction does not apply to any of Ash's old Pokemon that later become fixed members of that series' party. Donphan in the Advanced Generation and Charizard in Black and White are prime examples. And because of the lack of variety between just Kanto and Jotto, this rule will apply starting at the Advanced Generation. In the third and last one, if Ash can access a Pokemon, that Pokemon cannot be used. So for Butterfree fluttering off to who knows where, or Greninja doing a first, second, and third shift cutting weeds, they can't be used in Sun and Moon or Journeys for example. And one last thing is that this will be split into 2 parts. One dedicated towards the Classic era up to Diamond and Pearl, and the second dedicated towards the Modern era up to Journeys. But I think that's everything that needs to be covered, so without stalling any longer, let's get started. So to start off with the original series, I'll split this into 2, the Kanto Saga and the Jotto Saga. The Kanto Saga will be accounting for the Orange Island since it's basically the true finale of the Indigo League, and his ultimate team here is his regular Orange Islands team. Not a very interesting start, but consider this a tutorial for how this works. The point is to find a mix of the strongest but also the most realistic choices. So whether it's an out-of-universe reason or just something that just makes sense narratively. And to start with the obvious ones, there's the Kanto starters. Bulbasaur, Squirtle. They don't exude the same efficiency they had in the Johto League or the Battle Frontier, but they still get the job done, but there's not too much to elaborate on them. But Charizard was a whole game changer. Like, the Orange Islands arc to me is massively overlooked, but this is when Ash became free of the bum allegations. This early in the anime, I know. You literally have Ash's Charizard, but finally locked in. I kind of wish that Indigo League Ash wasn't the only part of the timeline people think exists before Jotto, but this era of Ash is a bona fide upgrade compared to Season 1. No doubt about it. It is what it is, I guess, but to keep it pushing, there's also the new edition of Snorlax. Another props for the Orange Islands for having Ash catch him, because this breed is the most elite specimen. But I'll let you in on a little something for those that don't know. A fun fact, an overlooked detail, the Orange Island secret sauce. But Ash's initial plan against Drake was to use Snorlax instead of Tauros. But due to the big dog having the nastiest case of the itis, Tauros had to be a substitute. So if you're wondering why the bull didn't make it, well, there we go. They're canonically a plan B. Just go with Snorlax instead. But the last one is the Uber driver of the Orange Islands, Lapras, and you could arguably swap him out with some more powerful and familiar alternatives like Kingler or Muck, though to me, they felt too gimmicky to ever leave Ash's box. Lapras though, however, not only has narrative advantages with its bond with Ash, but also power that makes it just as viable, if not more than those two arguably. Not really much else to say. This team, to an extent, may very well be basic, standard, and generic, but it's definitely the most fitting. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And as for Jotto, the two particular Pokemon I want set for this team are Charizard and Snorlax, and my word, are these two the must-need for this portion of the Ultimate Teams. Look back to Ash's final highlights of the series against Claire, Gary, and Harrison, and let me just reword that. Like, the final gym leader, the main rival, and the strongest trainer in the league. The fact they were both present there and truly demonstrated Ash's power the best was phenomenal. Because the Jotto guys felt really minor in comparison though, let's make the remaining ones all about them. We kinda already get the gist of Charizard and Snorlax at this point. Reminder, the second rule applies starting at Gen 3, so the first I had in mind is Bayleaf, who not only may share the closest bond with Ash, but is in my opinion, the strongest of the Johto team. It's no secret that the Johto guys were handled less than well compared to other teams, but Bayleaf was honestly given the most grace. Her wins are sorta indistinguishable compared to the rest, but the level of Pokemon that required to take her out were on a much higher playing field. Notably, the final bosses that required powerhouses like Charizard to step in. And fun fact, she's the only Pokemon other than Charizard and Snorlax to battle in both of Ash's 6v6s in the Johto League back to back. And for the last two, they're free range to be whoever, as long as they're from the main Johto team, cause initially I thought Heracross, for example, was a really good pick, but then you realize they're canonically a very low priority choice. Between Cyndaquil, Totodile, Noctowl, and Phanpy, they all had higher priority, but it's really up to you to figure out which two of the four make it in the end. It really doesn't matter. The first one was Cyndaquil, primarily due to it being much higher on the priority chain. Its feats aren't as good compared to the rest of the team by the end of the series, but I think it was used way too often across Johto for Ash not to include it. And as for the second, I'd like to put my faith onto Phanpy. Their feats and usage are definitely average compared to its teammates, but something I appreciate with Phanpy is its growth and potential. In a mere 44 episodes, Phanpy grew to become just as competent as everyone else on the team that was around since the beginning, and if you ask me, it still had plenty of room to grow. And essentially, that is my idea of Ash's Ultimate Team for Johto. And arriving at the advanced generation, it's time to finally utilize rule number 2. And before we get to the series exclusives, let's go over all the guest stars, because here it's a 3-in-1, and those three are Charizard, Bulbasaur, and Squirtle. Now, even I can tell there's very little diversity here, but after thinking it over, it literally made the most sense. First off, in terms of usability at this point in the series, these four are objectively Ash's first ever Pokemon, and depending on who you ask, you can argue they're also his top 4 closest. Secondly, they all let a hand in defeating Ash's strongest obstacle at the time, and on feats alone, you can even further argue this is Ash's top 4 strongest at this point of the show. Honestly, just revisiting Ash vs. Brendan alone made me think about how important and impressive these four are together. And I guess the last thing is something interesting with how Gen 3's whole thing was the introduction of Hoenn and the re-exploration of Kanto. This team, in a way, is an example of how that charm was captured, and while we covered Kanto, let's get on to Hoenn. Starting this team with those series exclusives, the easiest choices to make had to be both Sceptile and Swellow. These two have to be the best dynamic duo out of all of Ash's teams. Like, there's other, possibly even better duos among the other regions, but none emulate the same work put in as these two. They're the right and left hands of Ash and Pikachu, the Zoel and Sanji, the wings of Ash's team, if you will. Swellow, on one hand, was the most reliable and consistent fighter of the team from the last few gyms, the Hoenn League, and even the Battle Frontier. And despite being off to a very very, 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 very lackluster start in middle, Sceptile found a way to close out the series with some of the best feats out of the whole team. The only other mon worthy enough to make it on the team was Corfish, whom I wanted to give my flowers to despite missing out on the team. He was consistently good throughout the entire series, and the only reason he missed out on the spot was that he had slightly worse lows than Swellow. And that's pretty much the whole team here, but something I really wanted to do that I won't do with any other series is to make an alternative team. Not a whole do-over, but just replacing Bulbasaur and Squirtle so there aren't 5 starters and 1 bird. Basically, swap them out with Snorlax and Donphan. Even in this series, Snorlax has shown to still be relevant as a powerhouse Ash can rely on. And as for Donphan, this perfectly leads up to what I meant back in the Jotto Ultimate Team. Their return in a Battle Frontier, having it evolve, perfectly shows what I meant about its potential. Its performance is still rather average, but I can definitely see it being a good underdog if given an actual chance and more screen time. And that's the alternate version of this series' team. Is the first one better or the second? No matter, I like both of these teams as they both serve their own unique purposes. And getting on to Diamond and Pearl, there should be no beating around the bush. It's obvious Infernape was gonna find his way onto the team. With how he was a key factor in one of the greatest written plotlines in the anime, it made him feel like the protagonist at times other than Ash and Pikachu. Even outside of his importance, Infernape to me was always the pillar of power, and especially for Sinnoh, he definitely played a role if Ash was to ever be at his peak. And to follow up on that, let's go a little bit on the chill side with a 2-in-1 here. So give a round of applause to both Heracross and Noctowl. Something I never really noticed growing up was how Gen 2 coded Gen 4 actually was. You'll notice it after revisiting, but there's Johto representation oozing all over the Diamond and Pearl anime, like Dawn Cyndaquil or Paul's infamous Ursaring, but my favorite example was Ash's use of his old Pokemon in the Sinnoh League. With Ash's main 2 matches excluding Paul and Tobias, his lineup was heavily Johto influenced. So to keep the Gen 2 tradition, I wanted to choose the 2 that did the best. So starting with Heracross, it's one of the few Ash actually uses multiple times, but at this point, Ash uses Heracross enough times to where I think it's actually high enough on the priority chain to be used. And now it's on to Noctowl, for which I picked up for 2 reasons. Unlike Quilava tying or Donphan jobbing, Noctowl came back for not a full but slight redemption since Johto, which showed that it can hold its weight better than before at least. The second and main reason that drove me to keep it here was that I wanted to preserve the role of the bird Pokemon. Yes, that's the primary reason. And based on that logic, spoiler alert, Staraptor didn't make the cut. But the last guest appearance is Sceptile. The Johto Pokemon is there for Gen 2 representation, but for Hoenn, it's to show off Ash's progression as a trainer. Ash's entire character arc in the Kanto Saga heavily rides off what was set up in the end of the Battle Frontier with his attempt to hurdle over Brandon. The big hurdle that happened around that time was Ash figuring out his own unique style, and looking at the battle with Tobias, it showed me some of that progression towards that style. This also is the first time I truly felt Sceptile was treated as a reliable powerhouse, because while it got a little bit of help, I felt that giving Tobias' Darkrai its first KO wasn't a job they'd just give to anybody. But we did Gen 2, we did Gen 3. Let's cycle back to Gen 4, and the second member from the team in Sinnoh, and the last member of this ultimate team entirely is Gible. I don't know if this is a hot take, but I think Gible is very under the radar compared to Ash's other Sinnoh Pokemon like Buizel, Staraptor, or Gliscor. Not only does he have an absurdly low amount of screen time, but a lack of connection to Ash's main trial and tribulations that happened across the whole series. But with his performance against Conway and the recognition he got from Tobias, he surpassed all expectations, and in many ways reminded me of Fampi with his potential. If everyone else on the team represented Ash's past and present, you could say Gible represents a future, and with that, the Sinnoh Ultimate Team is assembled. So for now, this is where I put a pause on the team making. It already takes everything out of me just to make something around the 15-minute mark, so dividing them into 2 parts will do wonders for my mental sanity. And one more thing is that I wanted to know if this concept made sense. Although obviously you can just let me know down below if I cooked or not, but again, Gens 5 through 8 will still be on the bucket list. It might not be next specifically, but it's near the top of the list. But yeah, that's pretty much all I got for now. Yep.